The air in the committee room was cold, too cold. I could feel the sweat drying on my neck as I stood behind the podium. My advisor, Dr. Sterling, sat in the front row. He was leaning back, tapping a expensive fountain pen against his chin. He looked smug, like a man who had already won. "Candidate Jimin Kim," the dean said, his voice echoing in the sterile room. "You may begin your presentation on the CRISPR sub-V delivery system." I looked at Sterling. He gave me a thin, oily smile. He thought I was about to hand him a $40 million patent on a silver platter. He thought I was the same quiet girl who had spent 5 years living on ramen and lab caffeine, ghostwriting his legacy while he took the credit. He didn't know that my thumb was pressing a small remote in my pocket. "Thank you, Dean," I said. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. Actually, before we get into the molecular data, I think it's vital we look at the true origin of this research, because the files I'm about to show you, they aren't in your handouts. I clicked the remote. The projector didn't show my first slide. Instead, a massive screenshot filled the wall. It was an email from Sterling's private account to a venture capital firm. The subject line, "Securing the asset. The student is handled." The room went dead silent. Sterling's pen stopped tapping. I watched the blood drain from his face until he was the color of unwashed lab glass. "Dr. Sterling," I said, turning to him while the cameras, the ones I had secretly set up for a private archive, recorded every second. "Should I explain this part? Or do you want to tell the dean why you tried to sell my life's work behind the university's back?" But let me back up, because to understand how I ended up sabotaging my own PhD defense, you need to understand how Dr. Sterling turned my dream into a 5-year prison sentence. I remember the day I got accepted into Dr. Sterling's lab. I thought I'd won the lottery. In the world of biotech, Sterling was a rock star. He had the cover of Nature, the multi-million-dollar grants, and that Silver Fox academic charm that made everyone believe he was the second coming of Pasteur. My parents, immigrants who spent 20 years running a dry cleaner in Queens, literally cried. To them, a PhD under a man like Sterling was the ultimate arrival. I was going to be the doctor they could brag about. But the reality of being Sterling's star student hit me about 3 months in. It started with the collaboration. "Ji-min," he'd say, leaning against my lab bench at 9 p.m. on a Friday. "This data on the lipid nanoparticles is exquisite, truly. But it needs a bit more. Authority. Let's put my name as lead author, and we'll get it into Cell. It's better for your career long-term to be associated with a high-impact paper, even as second author, than to lead on a mid-tier journal. You understand, right?" I understood, or I thought I did. I was 24. I was eager to please. I nodded, signed the forms, and watched as my 6 months of sleepless nights became another feather in his cap. He didn't even mention my name during the department seminar. He used "we" when talking about the funding, but "I" when talking about the breakthrough. By the 3rd year, the math was slipping. I wasn't a student anymore. I was an indentured servant. I was managing his entire lab. I was teaching his undergrad classes. I was even picking up his dry cleaning because he was too busy saving the world. My typical day started at 5 a.m. I'd be in the lab before the building's HVAC system even kicked in. I had to manage the CRISPR cultures. If the temperature fluctuated by even half a degree, the whole batch was toast. Sterling didn't care about the science anymore. He only cared about the deliverables. He was obsessed with the sub-V system, my brainchild. I had found a way to bridge the blood-brain barrier using a modified viral envelope. It was the holy grail. The pressure was suffocating. I started losing hair. My skin turned a gray, sickly shade from the lack of sunlight and the constant hum of the centrifuges. I was living on lukewarm coffee and those protein bars that taste like sawdust. My only friends were the lab mice and the janitor, Mike, who saw me more often than my own boyfriend did. Speaking of my boyfriend, Kevin, that was the first thing Sterling took from me. "Ji-min, you're distracted," Sterling told me one afternoon, looking over my shoulder at a text message from Kevin asking if I was coming home for our anniversary dinner. The Sub-V project is at a critical juncture. If you can't give me 100%, maybe you're not cut out for the PhD track. There are 50 candidates in the waitlist who would kill for this bench. It was a veiled threat. It was always a threat. He knew I had no safety net. If I dropped out, my visa status would be in jeopardy, and my parents' pride would be shattered. So, I stayed. I canceled the dinner. I broke up with Kevin 2 weeks later because I was never there. Sterling didn't just want my brain, he wanted my entire existence. He started isolating me from the rest of the department. He told the dean I was socially anxious and preferred to work alone. He blocked me from attending conferences, claiming the IP was too sensitive to risk exposure. In reality, he just didn't want anyone to realize that I was the one doing the math while he was at the golf course with big pharma execs. The power dynamic was absolute. He was the gatekeeper to my entire future. He controlled my stipend, my thesis, and my reputation. Every time I tried to push back, every time I asked when we would file the patent with me as the primary inventor, he'd get this cold, disappointed look in his eyes. "Don't be greedy, Jimin," he'd say, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous hiss. "The university owns the IP. I am the principal investigator. You are a trainee. You're lucky I'm even letting you work on a project of this magnitude. Without my name on that paper, it's just a girl playing with test tubes. With my name, it's a revolution." I started noticing the discrepancies in the lab accounts around month 36. Sterling was burning through grant money like it was kindling. He was renting high-end SUVs on the lab's dime and consulting for companies that were direct competitors to our university's interests. I found a folder on the shared drive he'd forgotten to encrypt. It contained drafts for a startup called Apex Biologics. The CEO? Dr. Arthur Sterling. The flagship product? My CRISPR Sub-V delivery system. My name. Nowhere to be found. He wasn't just stealing the credit. He was preparing to steal the entire technology and sell it to the highest bidder, leaving the university and me in the dust. He was planning to wait until I defended my thesis, sign off on my degree, and then immediately file a private patent claiming he'd developed the tech in his private home lab to avoid university IP claims. I felt a cold, sharp rage bloom in my chest. It wasn't a hot rage. It was the kind of cold that makes you very, very still. I looked at the calendars. My defense was 6 months away. "Okay, Dr. Sterling," I whispered to the empty lab, the glow of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. "You want to play the principal investigator game. Let's play. But I've been the one running the experiments for 5 years. I know the data better than you. And I know exactly where the bodies are buried." I didn't confront him. Not yet. I went back to work. I became the perfect submissive student again. I even started bringing him coffee. I wanted him to feel completely safe. I wanted him to believe that the little Asian girl was exactly who he thought she was, a brilliant tool, but a tool nonetheless. But every night after he left to go to his 5-bedroom house in the suburbs, I stayed. I wasn't just doing science anymore. I was doing digital forensics. I was BCCing every email to a secure offshore server. I was recording our meetings with a pen cam. I was building a cage, one bar at a time. And the best part? He was the one who handed me the keys. The next 3 months were a psychological slow burn. To Sterling, I was just a ghost in a white lab coat. I showed up at 5 a.m., I stayed until midnight, and I always had the fresh charts ready when he swanned in with his wealthy consultants. But inside, I was a different person. Every condescending pat on the shoulder, every good girl Jimin, was a deposit into a bank of pure cold-blooded resentment. Sterling began the final stages of exporting my life's work. He started bringing in these slick guys who definitely weren't academics. They were patent lawyers and venture capitalists from his shell company, Apex Biologics. He introduced me as his technician, often pretending to forget my name entirely in front of them. "This is, Jimin. She handles the basic protocols," he'd say, waving a hand toward my centrifuges like he was describing a dishwasher. But the Sub-V concept, the whole delivery architecture, that's the fruit of my 30 years in the field, of course. I stood there, clutching my tablet, smiling like a mannequin. I saw one of the investors, a guy in a $5,000 suit, look at me with a flicker of pity. They didn't know that the mannequin was currently recording their entire conversation through a high-gain mic hidden in my university lapel pin. The tension hit a breaking point when the university announced the annual biotech symposium. It was a massive deal. I prepared a poster and an abstract where, for the first time, I listed myself as the lead author. I thought, surely, in the hollered halls of academia, he wouldn't dare to block me. I was a fool. Sterling called me into his office the day before the event. His office smelt like expensive bourbon and old leather. He didn't ask me to sit. "Jimin, I saw your submission for the symposium," he said, staring at his monitor. "I've withdrawn it." "What? But why, Dr. Sterling? The data is solid. The paper is almost ready. The data belongs to the lab," he said, finally looking up. His eyes were dead, and I and the lab, "Your work is premature. You're too emotionally attached to the results, and it's making you blind to the flaws. Presenting now will embarrass my reputation." He stood up and walked around the desk. He was a foot taller than me, and his shadow swallowed me whole. "Listen to me carefully. You are here to get a degree. My signature is the only thing standing between you and a career in science, or a one-way ticket back to Seoul. You will not speak to the press. You will sit at your bench and get the purity levels to 99.9%. Do you understand?" I looked into those empty, arrogant eyes. I realized then that he wasn't just a thief, he was a predator. He wouldn't stop until he drained me of every drop of intellectual value, then he'd discard me like a used pipette tip. "Yes, Dr. Sterling," I whispered, bowing my head. "I understand." He gave a smug little grunt and went back to his emails. But the second the door closed, I pulled out my phone. I had his calendar synced. I knew he was leaving for a power lunch in 10 minutes. I slipped back into his office after he left. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my flash drive. This was it. I knew he kept physical copies of the Apex documents in a safe behind a fake book, but I didn't need the safe. I needed his workstation. He was so arrogant. He thought no one would ever touch his things. His password, 1994, the year of his first major grant. Pathetic. I plugged in my encrypted drive and started the dump. Emails, financial ledgers, patent drafts, and then I found the smoking gun. It was a contract with an offshore firm in the Caymans. Sterling wasn't just starting a company, he was laundering university grant money. Millions of dollars meant for cancer research were being diverted to pay for his private real estate and personal accounts. He was literally stealing from taxpayers and sick people to fund his ego. But the most chilling thing was a folder titled Jimin_exit. I opened it. It was a pre-written report to the ethics committee. In it, Sterling accused me of falsifying data. He'd fabricated evidence that I'd been faking the sub-V test results for 3 years. The plan was brilliant and sociopathic. The moment the technology was safely inside Apex, he'd accuse me of fraud, annul my PhD, and destroy my reputation forever. It was the perfect way to silence the only witness who knew the truth. It would be the word of the great Dr. Sterling against a mentally unstable grad student. I sat in the dark of his office, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. The tears were burning, but they weren't tears of hurt. They were tears of pure distilled hatred. "Not today, Arthur," I whispered, yanking the drive. "You dug this grave. I'm just going to help you lie in it." For the next month, I lived a double life. By day, I was the terrified, submissive student. I even let him humiliate me in front of the lab group, calling my latest calculations juvenile and making me redo them 3 times. I saw my colleagues look away in shame. They knew, but they were as scared of him as I was. But at night, I was the architect of his execution. I met Mike, the janitor. Turns out, Mike hated Sterling too. The professor had gotten Mike's son fired from campus security years ago over a parking dispute.
"What do you need, kid?" Mike asked in the chemical-smelling supply closet.
"Access to the server room an hour before my defense, Mike, and I need the hallway cameras to glitch for 5 minutes. Mike grinned. "Consider it done. That old goat has had it coming." I started building my presentation, but I made 2 versions. One was the one Sterling approved, boring, full of his edits, with his name on every slide. The second one, I called it the nuclear option. I embedded everything. Screenshots of the Cayman accounts, recordings of his threats, and the original lab logs with digital timestamps proving the sub-V tech was mine from day one. I also found a backdoor. Sterling used the same tablet to control the presentation and access his private Apex cloud. I wrote a small script, a Trojan horse. The moment he pressed next slide, on my final defense, the script would trigger a screen mirror of his private files directly onto the auditorium's 40-foot projector. The hardest part was the silence. Every morning I'd see his smug face and imagine what it would look like when his world turned to ash in front of the entire scientific community. A week before the defense, he dropped a folder on my desk. "This is your final script, G-Min. Memorize it. It details how I inspired you to discover the subsystem. If you deviate by one word, you don't graduate." I took the folder and looked him right in the eye. My voice was dead calm. "Don't worry, Dr. Sterling. This defense will be unforgettable for both of us." The mock defense wasn't supposed to be a public execution, but Sterling had other plans. 4 days before the actual date, he called a mandatory rehearsal in the main auditorium. I walked in thinking it would just be the lab group. I was wrong. The front row was packed. There were 3 suits from a Swiss pharma giant, 2 lawyers I'd seen in Sterling's private office, and the dean of research, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Sterling stood at the back of the room like a Roman emperor. He didn't even look at me. He was busy laughing with one of the investors, pointing at my title slide on the massive screen. Sterling called out, his voice booming and full of fake warmth. "Let's see if you can handle the pressure. Remember, these gentlemen are here to see the future of biotech. Try not to bore them with the technical minutia I had to fix for you." The laughter from the suits felt like a physical blow. I started the presentation. My hands were ice cold. I got about 3 minutes in, explaining the viral envelope's interaction with the blood-brain barrier, the part of the research I had spent 14 months perfecting, when Sterling interrupted. "Stop. Just stop." He sighed, loud enough for the back row to hear. He walked down the aisle, shaking his head. "See, this is the problem, gentlemen. This is why you need an experienced PI to guide these raw talents. G-Min, you're butchering the delivery of my theory. You're making it sound like a happy accident instead of a calculated breakthrough." "But Dr. Sterling," I said, my voice small, "the data shows that the protein folding was the key. The data shows what I tell it to show," he snapped. The room went silent. Even the suits looked a little uncomfortable. He realized he'd overstepped and immediately pivoted back to his charming mentor persona, but the mask had slipped. He walked up onto the stage, literally nudging me away from the podium. He took the clicker out of my hand like I was a child who couldn't be trusted with the remote. "Go sit down, G-Min. I'll handle the heavy lifting. You're clearly not ready for the big leagues." I sat in the front row, forced to watch as he presented my work to his future business partners. He didn't just take the credit. He rewrote the history of the discovery in real time. He painted me as a reliable pair of hands who follow his brilliant instructions. He even made a joke about my cultural background making me excellent at repetitive tasks, but lacking in visionary leadership. The dean didn't say a word. He just stared at his notepad. Everyone in that room knew what was happening. It was academic gaslighting on a professional scale. After the rehearsal, the investors left, looking impressed. Sterling stayed behind, basking in the glow of his own ego. He waited until the room was empty except for us. Then he walked over to where I was still sitting, frozen. "You look upset, Ji-Min," he said, his voice dropping to that low, dangerous hiss. "Don't be. You should be grateful. Those men are going to make us very, very rich. Well, they're going to make me rich. You'll get your little degree, a nice recommendation letter, and a job at some mid-level lab where you can be a quiet little worker bee for the rest of your life." I finally looked up at him. "You're selling the patent to them, aren't you?" Before I even defend, he laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "I'm securing the legacy. And don't think about going to the board. I've already filed that report on your date inconsistencies. If you even whisper a word about this to anyone, I'll hit the send button. You'll be blacklisted from every lab in the hemisphere. No PhD, no career, no visa. You'll be back in Queens cleaning shirts with your parents by next month." He leaned in closer, smelling of expensive espresso and cold ambition. "Know your place, Ji-Min. You're a tool, and tools don't get to own the things they build." He walked out. leaving me in the silence of the empty auditorium. I sat there for an hour. The janitor, Mike, eventually came in with his mop. He didn't say anything at first. He just started working near the stage. "You okay, kid?" he asked quietly. "I'm done, Mike," I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. "I'm done being a tool." "Good," Mike muttered. "The server room is open at 7 a.m. on Friday. I checked the cameras. They're scheduled for a maintenance during your defense slot. Nobody's gonna see a thing." That was the moment, the breaking point. Up until then, a small part of me, the part that still respected the institution of science, wanted to find a way to resolve this through the proper channels. I wanted to believe the system worked. But Sterling had just shown me that the system was a cage, and he was the one holding the cattle prod. I went back to the lab that night. I didn't work on my research. I worked on the Trojan horse. I refined the script to ensure that when it triggered, it wouldn't just show one file, it would scroll through his entire private directory. I wanted the world to see his offshore bank balances, his derogatory emails about the dean, and the draft of the lawsuit he was planning to file against the university to take the IP private. I also did one more thing. I reached out to a contact at Biotech Insider, a major industry blog. I didn't give them the story. I just gave them a tip. If you want to see the biggest academic fraud in a decade, be at the University Biotech Defense this Friday, 10 a.m. Room 402. Don't miss the slides. I didn't sleep for the next 3 days. I couldn't eat. I lived on adrenaline and the vision of Sterling's face when the screen turned from my data to his crimes. On Thursday night, Sterling sent me one last email. It was a PDF of the corrected presentation. He'd removed my name from the title slide entirely. It just said, "A novel CRISPR sub-delivery system, presented by candidate Ji-Min Kim, supervised and conceived by Dr. Arthur Sterling." I didn't reply. I just saved the file, renamed it The End XEC, and prepared my suit for the morning. It was a black suit, professional, sharp, like something you wear to a wedding or a funeral. I realized then that I wasn't just defending a thesis anymore. I was defending my right to exist as a person, not a product. Sterling thought he was the architect, but he had forgotten the most basic rule of engineering. If you put too much pressure on a foundation, eventually the whole structure collapses. And I was the crack in his foundation that he never saw coming. The final 24 hours felt like a fever dream. I moved through the lab with the mechanical precision of the robots I programmed. I didn't speak. I didn't make eye contact. I was a ghost inhabiting my own life. Sterling was in high spirits, whistling as he packed his leather briefcase, likely dreaming of the Mediterranean villas my research was about to buy him. He didn't notice that my final review of the slides took 6 hours because I was manually injecting the Trojan script into the presentation's metadata. At 7 a.m. on Friday, the campus was still dripped in a gray morning mist. The only sound was the distant hum of the freeway and the rhythmic squeak of Mike's mop bucket. I met him by the service elevator. He didn't say a word, just nodded and swiped his master key. The server room was a cavern of blinking blue lights and a constant aggressive chill. It was the brain of the university, and for 30 minutes it belonged to me. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I wasn't just uploading a presentation, I was rerouting the auditorium's display feed. Usually, the podium laptop is a closed loop. I changed that. I established a remote bridge to Sterling's private cloud, the one he thought was untraceable because he used a VPN. "You sure about this, kid?" Mike whispered, leaning against the doorframe, keeping watch. "There's no undo button on this one." He told me, "Tools don't get to own what they build, Mike," I said, my eyes reflected in the monitor. "I'm just proving him wrong. I'm showing him exactly how powerful a tool can be when it's used by the right person." I finished the upload. The core nuclear option was live. It was a time-sensitive trigger. At exactly 10:15 a.m., 15 minutes into the defense, right when Sterling would be at his most arrogant, the script would bypass the presentation software and begin the live audit. I walked out of the server room and headed to the department's locker room to change. I put on the black suit. I tied my hair back so tight it pulled at my scalp. I looked in a mirror and didn't see a student. I saw a specialist, a cleaner. By 9:30 a.m., the hallway outside room 402 was buzzing. This wasn't a normal defense. Usually it's just the committee and a few bored grad students looking for free cookies. But today, the suits from the Swiss firm were there, looking like sharks in tailored wool. There were also two people I recognized from the Biotech Insider blog, holding tablets and looking around with hushed curiosity. Sterling was in the center of the room, holding court. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my annual stipend. He was beaming, shaking hands, already acting like the CEO of Apex Biologics. When he saw me, he gave me a look of pure, patronizing confidence. "Ready for your big day, G-Min?" he asked, loud enough for the committee to hear. "Don't be nervous. Just stick to the script I gave you, and we'll have you out of here with those 3 letters behind your name in no time." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that smelled of peppermint and malice. "Remember what we discussed. One wrong word and I send that ethics report. You'll be in a van to JFK before the sun sets. Smile, you little thief. This is your graduation." I smiled. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. "I'm ready, Dr. Sterling. More than you know." The committee filed in. The dean looked pale. I suspect he knew something was wrong, but was too deep in Sterling's pocket to stop the train. I took my place at the podium. I plugged in the dummy flash drive, the one Sterling had inspected. It was empty. The real presentation was already sitting on the server, waiting for the handshake signal from my phone. As the clock ticked toward 10 a.m., I felt a strange sense of peace. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold, mathematical certainty. I looked at the audience. The investors were ready to buy a lie. The committee was ready to rubber stamp a theft, and Sterling was ready to ascend to his throne. I took a sip of water. My hand was steady. "Candidate Ji-Min Kim," the dean announced, his voice echoing. "You may begin your defense of the CRISPR sub-V delivery system." I looked at the back of the room. Mike was standing by the door, his arms crossed, a small, knowing grin on his face. I reached into my pocket and tapped the start sequence on my phone. "Thank you, Dean. Thank you, members of the committee." I began, my voice clear and projecting to the very back. "Today, we aren't just going to discuss the molecular mechanics of sub-V. We are going to discuss the entire history of this project, from its inception to its current private valuation." In the front row, Sterling's brow furrowed. That wasn't in the script. He shifted in his seat, his hand going to his pocket, likely touching his own tablet. He gave me a sharp, warning glare. I ignored it. I clicked the first slide. It was a standard title page. The sub-V system, I continued, was designed to be an open-access breakthrough for the treatment of neurodegenerative diseases. However, as the data developed, so did other interests. Interests that involve millions of dollars and misappropriated university funds. The room went stone-cold silent. One of the Swiss investors leaned forward, whispering to his lawyer. Sterling stood up halfway, his face turning a blotchy, angry red. "G-Min," he barked. "Stick to the technicals. We don't have time for this, actually, Dr. Sterling," I said, clicking the remote again. "We have all the time in the world. And according to your private emails with Apex Biologics, time is exactly what you've been stealing from this university." I hit the trigger. The screen didn't show the next slide. It flickered once, then transformed into a high-resolution view of Sterling's private cloud storage. Folder after folder appeared, labeled with dates and dollar amounts. The top file, already opening automatically, was a PDF titled Apex Biologics, IP Transfer Agreement Ji-Min Kim Exit Strategy. I stepped away from the podium, giving the room a full, unobstructed view of the destruction. "Let's start with the Cayman accounts, shall we?" I asked. The sound of Sterling's briefcase hitting the floor was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind of silence that precedes a building's collapse. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the hum of the projector fan, blowing hot air into a room that had turned freezing. Then, the chaos began. Sterling didn't just get angry, he detonated. He lunged toward the podium, his face no longer that of a dignified professor, but a cornered animal. "Turn it off! Ji-Min, shut it down right now. This is a security breach. This is illegal hacking." He was screaming, his voice cracking, spit flying from his lips as he scrambled for the laptop. But the laptop on the podium wasn't the source. I had bypassed it. He grabbed the device and shook it, but the screen on the wall stayed frozen on the Apex Biologics IP transfer agreement. The exit strategy document was now scrolling automatically, highlighting the paragraph where Sterling described me as a disposable asset whose reputation would be systematically invalidated to clear the way for the patent sale. Dr. Sterling, please sit down, the dean said, but his voice was weak, lacking any conviction. He was looking at the screen, his eyes wide as he saw his own name in a CC'd email regarding a discretionary bonus from Sterling's offshore account. Sit down, Sterling roared, turning on the dean. She's sabotaging years of work. She's a thief. She's mentally unstable. He turned back to the audience, his hands waving wildly toward the Swiss investors. Gentlemen, don't believe this. This is a fabrication, a deepfake. My account was compromised. The lead investor from the Swiss firm stood up. He didn't look angry, he looked disgusted. He didn't say a word to Sterling. He just looked at his two lawyers, gave a sharp nod toward the door, and they began packing their briefcases. The deal was dead. They weren't going to touch a patent that was currently radioactive. No, wait! Klaus, wait! Sterling scrambled off the stage, nearly tripping over the cord of the microphone. He tried to grab the investor's arm, but the man recoiled as if Sterling were covered in lab waste. I stood perfectly still at the edge of the stage. I felt like I was watching a movie. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the judge. I picked up the microphone, my voice amplified over Sterling's frantic begging. If you look at the screen now, I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a scalpel, you'll see the original time-stamped logs from 3 years ago. These logs prove that Dr. Sterling didn't conceive the sub-V system. In fact, if you scroll to the 2023 folder, you'll find his notes where he told me the project was a waste of grant money and ordered me to shut it down. I continued the research in secret, on my own time, using my own resources. Another click, and the screen shifted. It showed a side-by-side comparison. On the left, the official lab results Sterling had been showing investors. On the right, the real results. Dr. Sterling altered the toxicity reports, I announced. The room gasped. This was the ultimate academic sin. He knew the current iteration of the viral envelope caused liver inflammation in 12% of the test subjects. He told me to smooth the curves. When I refused, he accessed the drive and changed the numbers himself. He was going to sell a dangerous delivery system to a pharma company, knowing it would likely fail in human trials, just so he could exit with his payout before the lawsuit started. Sterling stopped chasing the investors. He turned around, his eyes bloodshot, his chest heaving. He looked at the committee, his colleagues, who were now looking at him like he was a stranger. You bitch, he hissed. It wasn't a shout this time. It was a venomous whisper that the microphone picked up and projected to every corner of the hall. I made you. I gave you everything. You were nothing but a girl in a lab coat until I put my name on your work. You think you can survive this? You think the university will protect you after you've embarrassed them like this? I'm not looking for protection, Arthur, I said, using his first name for the first time. I'm looking for the truth. And the truth is, you aren't a scientist. You're a middleman. You're a broker of other people's brilliance. And today, your lease on my brain is officially expired. The dean finally stood up, his face ashen. This defense is suspended. We need to clear the room. Security is on the way. Security isn't just coming for me, Dean, I said, glancing at the back of the room. The door swung open. It wasn't campus security. It was 4 men in dark windbreakers with letters on the back that made the dean's knees buckle. FBI. Behind them was the university's general counsel, looking like she'd just seen a ghost. I had sent the folder to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's White-Collar Crime Division 2 days ago. Misappropriation of federal grant money is a felony. Laundering that money through the Caymans is a ticket to a federal penitentiary. Sterling saw them and actually tried to run. He made a break for the side exit, but he was a 60-year-old man who spent his life behind a desk. He didn't even make it to the door. 2 agents intercepted him, pinning him against the very wall that was still projecting his fraudulent bank statements. Arthur Sterling, you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement of federal funds, and witness intimidation, one of the agents said. The click of the handcuffs echoing through the silent room. I watched as they led him away. He wasn't screaming anymore. He looked small. He looked like the fraud he always was. As he passed the podium, he looked at me. And for a second, I saw it, not anger, but a profound, pathetic fear. He realized that the tool had finally broken the master. I turned back to the committee. They were all standing now, looking at me with a mix of awe and terror. I walked over to the laptop, typed in one final command, and the screen went black. I believe my time is up, I said. I'll be in the lab if anyone needs to discuss the actual science. I walked off the stage. My legs felt like jelly, but I didn't stumble. I walked past the Biotech Insider reporters who were typing furiously. I walked past the dean, who was trying to hide his face. I walked out into the hallway where Mike was waiting with his mop. He didn't say anything. He just reached out and gave me a firm, silent thumbs up. I walked out of the building and into the bright midday sun. I took a deep breath of air that didn't smell like chemicals or lies. I wasn't a PhD yet. I didn't have a job. I didn't even know if I'd have a place to live next week. But for the first time in 5 years, my mind belonged to me. The weeks following the nuclear defense were a blur of depositions, legal filings, and a media firestorm I wasn't entirely prepared for. The story broke on Biotech Insider within 2 hours, and by the next morning, it was on the front page of the New York Times Science section. The headline read, CRISPR's New Frontier, Sabotage, Shell Companies, and the Fall of an Academic Giant. The university went into full damage control mode. At first, they tried to distance themselves from me, claiming I had violated IT protocols and professional ethics by hacking into Sterling's account. They even hinted at disciplinary action. But that lasted exactly 48 hours. Once the public saw the evidence of the dean's discretionary bonuses and the university's complicity in ignoring Sterling's toxic behavior, the narrative shifted. I wasn't a hacker. I was a whistleblower. I received a letter from the Board of Trustees a month later. They had fired the dean. They had disbanded the ethics committee that Sterling had been planning to use as a weapon against me. And most importantly, they invited me to a private hearing to finalize my academic status. I walked into that boardroom with 2 lawyers provided pro bono by a scientific integrity nonprofit. The atmosphere was very different from my defense. No suits from pharma companies, no smug advisors, just a group of very embarrassed academics who realized I held the keys to their remaining reputation. Candidate Kim, the acting provost said, looking at me over her glasses. We have reviewed your original logs. We have also had an independent panel verify your sub-data, the real data. Their conclusion is that your word is not only sound, but revolutionary. The university is prepared to grant your PhD immediately, with a special commendation for research integrity. I didn't smile. I didn't thank them. I just looked at the diploma they slid across the table. It was just a piece of paper. The real victory had happened the moment Sterling's hands were cuffed. There's the matter of the patent, I said. The room went quiet. The university will, of course, hold the primary rights, their lawyer started. As per your employment contract, my contract was predicated on a fair and ethical working environment. I interrupted. Environment you failed to provide. My lawyers have already filed a motion to void the IP assignment based on systemic fraud and the attempted sale of unsafe data to third parties. If you want to keep any stake in SubV, you're going to have to agree to my terms. My terms were simple. SubV would be licensed under an open innovation model. No exclusive sales to giant pharma firms that would jack up the price. The university would get their overhead, but I would lead the nonprofit foundation that controlled the licensing. I wanted to make sure that the cure I spent 5 years bleeding for actually reached the people who needed it. They fought me for 3 days. Then they looked at the PR nightmare they were already in and signed the papers. As for Arthur Sterling, His fall was spectacular. The FBI found even more than I did. It turned out he hadn't just been laundering money, he'd been faking peer reviews for other professors in exchange for kickbacks. He was a one-man corruption hub. He took a plea deal to avoid 20 years in federal prison. He is currently serving 7 years in a minimum security facility in Pennsylvania. He lost his tenure, his license to practice medicine, and his Silver Fox reputation. I heard through the grapevine that he's working in the prison library, probably still trying to convince the other inmates that he's the smartest man in the room. My parents finally understood what had happened when they saw me on a televised interview. My dad called me, his voice thick with emotion. "Jimina," he said, "I didn't care about the doctor title. I just didn't want you to be a ghost." That was the only time I cried through the whole ordeal. Today, I don't work in a university lab. I have my own space in a biotech incubator in Brooklyn. It's smaller, and the equipment isn't as shiny as Sterling's, but the air is different. There are no secrets here, no gatekeepers. Mike, the janitor, retired shortly after the scandal. I used part of my first foundation grant to set up a scholarship in his son's name for students coming from working-class backgrounds. We grab coffee once a month. He still wears his university cap, but he wears it with a smirk now. Last week, I received a package in the mail. It was a copy of a new textbook on genetic engineering. I flipped to the chapter on viral envelope delivery systems. There, in the very first paragraph, was my name. Not as a technician, not as a trainee. The Kim sub-V method, pioneered by Dr. Ji-Min Kim. I closed the book and looked out the window at the city. The road was long and the cost was high. I lost my 20s, my first serious relationship, and my faith in the ivory tower. But I gained something Sterling will never have. I built something that matters, and I'm the one who owns it. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the way I did it, if I regret the nuclear option and the public humiliation of my mentor. I just tell them the same thing I told the FBI agents on that Friday morning. In science, you have to follow the data. And the data told me that the only way to save the research was to destroy the man who was hiding it. I'm no longer the quiet girl in the back of the lab. I'm the one who stayed standing when the room collapsed. And honestly, I've never felt more alive.